Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across the continent and beyond. But let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So we're going to be covering that $300 million settlement between Barrick Gold and the government of Tanzania in a few minutes. But it's worth checking in on the firm's shares. Down 2 2/3% at 16.31 GMT, about $17 a share in Canada. Kenya will have a pretty short trading week. October the 21st is a public holiday. We'll keep a very, very close eye, though, on bank stocks this week. FTSE 100 essentially in the green at 16.35 GMT, as Morgan Stanley analysts are arguing now that we have a path of clarity over the weekend, UK equities are now investable. Here's what's coming up tonight. Nigeria gets a green light for a $3 billion World Bank loan for its national grid. The UK Speaker rules against the government trying to get another vote on its Brexit deal. And we'll try out an app that brings groceries to your doorstep in Ghana. All right then, so let's start in Nigeria, where the central bank has essentially refunded lenders some, not all, some of the $1.4 billion that it essentially fined them by taking as additional cash reserves. This comes after the banks failed essentially to meet the central bank's directive to commercial banks to meet a very specific loan-to-deposit ratio, 60% in this case, by the end of September. Now, the CBN has again raised that loan-to-deposit ratio target to 65%, and banks have to meet it by the end of the year. Here's CGTN's Deji Banwas with more.
If there was any doubt as to how effective the measures taken by the Central Bank of Nigeria on the minimum loan-to-deposit ratio, the fact that almost all the deposit money banks have now met the 60% requirement set by the Apex Bank back in July has erased any shred of it. The CBN had debited a combined sum of $1.4 billion from the vault of the banks that had earlier failed to meet its September deadline for the 60% loan-to-deposit ratio, holding their cash at 0% interest rates. But having met the requirements, quite a number of the banks have had their funds returned. But they would also be in a race to meet up with the December deadline of the new LDR of 65% set by the central bank.
Ideally, credit drive economy. Credit, starting from consumer credit, that will stimulate consumption. Consumption will stimulate demand for goods and services, which will stimulate production. That's obviously what the government is driving at. And I think right now the banks are trying to expand their consumer credit. I'm hoping that the benefit of that expansion of consumption or consumer credit will be trapped locally. It will not lead to an uptick in demand for imports, because we also must have the capacity to produce those goods that the consumers will be demanding from the credit they are going to be enjoying.
The pressure to meet up with the new 65% LDR is forcing banks to become more aggressive in creating loans even to subprime borrowers, something some say could lead to increase in non-performing loans if not well managed.
Most of the banks are involving consumer credits. They are calling their customers based on the customers' annual salaries or monthly salaries, offering them credit cards so that they can withdraw or make payments in advance. So basically, the banks have become quite more aggressive. How that will eventually play out as it relates to the banks' non-performing loans will be yet to be determined, because basically when you begin to lend indiscriminately, the tendency that you will lend to subprime customers is high, and any lending to subprime customers is exposed, is subject to higher risk of default.
Given the number of banks which were unable to meet the previous deadline, a 3-month directive to meet up with an even higher percentage may be a tough ask. Some analysts suggest the CBN considers extending the deadline.
If it becomes a systemic issue, the banks could push for an extension of the time, and the central bank may consider an extension, given the fact that September, when the 60% was implemented, was just 3 months earlier than the December period, and they may consider giving the banks more time.
Since the Central Bank of Nigeria introduced the regulations on loan-to-deposit ratio, it's estimated that deposit money banks have, within a period of 3 months, lent around $2.4 billion to the real sector of the Nigerian economy. Now, there have been reports that some banks are lending out money to speculators to go buy treasury bills. The central bank says any bank or customer caught in the act will face very severe sanctions. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, the World Bank has also approved Nigeria's request for a $3 billion loan for the expansion of the transmission and distribution networks in its power sector. Now, that loan is expected to be disbursed in 4 tranches of $750 million each, starting next year. Ideally, the fund should cover the gap and essentially between the current tariff that investors have now deemed to be too low compared to other countries, essentially allowing the country to invest in improving its grid. Prior to this development, the federal government had approved the injection of nearly $2 billion into the country's electricity market. It's an intervention fund intended for the payment of the shortfall in electricity invoices for the entire market. All right, then let's dig into this. Nigeria's electricity sector with all its issues, with City TN's Deji Banbos is live in Lagos tonight. So, Deji, let's start with the finance minister. She says this cash will be invested in improving transmission and distribution. But do we know precisely what parts of the grid will be targeted and when these upgrades will be finished?
I think it's virtually the entire grid itself, because you know, the fact is that the grid at some point, we continue to have this frequent collapse of the grid. So the entire grid is obsolete, especially when you talk about transmission now, completely obsolete and out of date. At the moment, Nigeria generates sometimes generates as much as, well, not so much, but, you know, by our own standard, that's quite much, 5,000 megawatts of power, but it's not able to distribute more than, you know, 3,000, between 3,000 to 3,500. And the reason is just because, you know, the grid itself, especially the transmission grid itself, does not have the capacity, as we speak, to carry huge amount of power. And it's part of the reasons why we continue to have these frequent power outages across the country, because the infrastructure in place is completely outdated. There's not been any kind of, you know, total overhaul of the system. And so what the government is trying to do is basically to do that with this loan. Not to, you know, completely overhaul the entire thing, because it will be needing more than that $3 billion, but at least carry out extensive infrastructure improvement now on the grid, so that people can begin to enjoy maybe not 24-hour power supply, but at least something better than what we're getting at the moment.
Right, just for context for our viewers, of course, Nigeria, that 5,300 or so megawatts of generation capacity, has twice as much power as Kenya, where I am at the moment, but it's got 4 times the population and a hell of a lot more land mass to cover. Deji, back to you. Grid outages and a lack of gas. These are the 2 main problems that we see affecting the national grid in Nigeria. And looking at the data for this year, the outages just keep getting worse and worse and worse. Why?
Well, it's getting worse and worse because, as I said, there's not been better investment now in the power sector. The government tried as much as possible to improve things when it privatized the power sector. As you know, the power sector is now largely in the hands of the private sector. The only part that is controlled by the government is transmission. So generation and distribution is now in the hands of the private sector. And everyone had thought that, you know, with the private sector coming in, things were going to improve. But unfortunately, things have not improved. You know, but apart from the issue of gas shortage that we experience once, you know, every now and then, there's also the problem of tariff, which is one of the things now that the government hopes to address now with this loan. Look, for a very long time, these power sector players have been complaining that the tariff they are being made to collect is not cost reflective, and that's quite true. I mean, for instance, people pay around 21 naira per kilowatt hour. That is quite low. So in terms of the cost to generate per kilowatt hour of power now, it is quite high. And what they are collecting as tariff is very, very low. Now, Nigeria has what we call the National Electricity Regulatory Agency. That agency actually said, well, it gives a time frame within which this tariff can actually be reviewed. But so far, the government has not allowed these private sector players to review the tariff. And so you have that funding gap. What the government does is to try and subsidize. And so what it is now trying to do is also to channel part of that money now to deal with that aspect of tariff, so that these companies, I'm talking about the private companies now operating in the power sectors, may be able to charge a cost-reflective tariff. So it's a very complex problem, not just about gas. It's far more than that, and that's what the government is trying to address. But even after getting this, it's not as if the entire problem will be solved completely, right, because you still have other problems that must be resolved as well. You still have problems with generation, transmission is still there. This money would not be enough to deal with all the problems when it comes to transmission. So it just might take a while before this is actually addressed. But the good thing is, if this money is coming in, it will make a lot of difference in terms of power supply in the country. I think there'll certainly be, it'll make a major difference, so to speak.
All right, here's the unpopular question then. Nigeria is Africa's biggest oil producer. It's got abundant natural gas reserves. And as you said, they could raise the tariff, right, to essentially cover some of these costs, if not all of them. So why does it have to borrow from the World Bank to invest in this grid? I mean, why not fund it locally, either through grants from the federal government, cash flow from utilities, or, as you pointed out, just raise the tariff?
Ramah, it's not so easy to raise the tariff. In this country, it's very difficult. Now, we're talking about a society that had for long been used to getting power supply almost for free. I can tell you today that any attempt by the power companies to raise tariff has always been met by, threats from the public. And even labor would always threaten to go on strike if these power companies do that. It's a very sensitive issue. It's just like oil, Ramah. Why is it that it is difficult for this country to remove subsidy? Remove oil subsidy and let petrol dealers sell petrol at a market price. It's a very sensitive issue, very, very sensitive. And you see, a fact is that, well, has Nigeria got the money to do this? I do not think so. That is why it is resorting to this loan. If Nigeria has got the money, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about budget deficit, for instance. The government would not be talking about borrowing a 2-point-something trillion naira now to fund part of the 2020 budget. Fact is, the money isn't there. It's true Nigeria is the biggest oil producer, but Ramah, come on, you know as well as I do that, not all the money that Nigeria makes from oil actually comes to it. We have production sharing contracts. These oil companies will still have to make their own money. The same thing goes with the gas sector, where we produce liquefied natural gas. So the money just isn't there. If the money was there, I don't think Nigeria would want to go borrow. So it's just as simple as that. Just take our budget, as I said, for instance. Look, we have this budget. We need money to fund the budget. We do not have the money. We're going to borrow money to fund the budget. So this loan is quite important. It's a good thing that the World Bank, the IMF also understands, and it's accepted to give Nigeria this loan. Let's just hope that the loan is utilized correctly, and I want to believe it would be. And I think it will make a whole world of difference. But, increasing tariff, it's a very, very, that will be a banana peel. No government in this country would, but eventually it will come to that, Ramah. Eventually it will come to that. But for now, it's going to be a tough one.
Well, indeed. We certainly had to deal with that back in the 90s. Let's see how Nigeria deals with the same problem. Deji Badmus, live in Lagos. Thank you. Now then, for some time, tech experts have been predicting that new players and new tech will quickly gain traction in the local banking industry. In this reality, fintechs, telcos and other agile players will essentially dominate today's financial services sector. CGTN's Angelo Coppola with a perspective from South Africa.
Some analysts suggest that the reality is that fintechs haven't had a meaningful impact on the banking landscape. It's the global digital pure-play giants like Google, Amazon, Facebook and Alibaba that represent the biggest threats. Meanwhile, Africa's two largest economies, Nigeria and South Africa, have taken a different approach to traditional and digitized banking.
For the GDP and the population growth, everybody is tapping into the retail market. Whereas in South Africa, it's more, while retail market is there, but it is more around the corporate investment banking, which is also a major focus for the banks over here.
One of the key inhibitors to attracting customers to the more formal banking environment is infrastructure.
So how do we get the infrastructure done, and how do we actually reduce the data cost? Because for those people who have not been banked, and with the growing population of youth, expecting them to actually have those costs to be borne by them, it actually poses a challenge. And even for the operator who wants to come and operate in that country, he also needs to have a commercially viable model so that he makes it's a sustainable business model.
Financial inclusion is a key driver. An important component of that is credit vetting, something that's a lot more straightforward in developed economies.
We'll be able to use data from their phones, from their interaction with society as a whole, to be able to credit vet them, provide credit to them. So even somebody that's got no credit record, which is typically a lot of Africa, can then have access to credit because it'll be based on alternative data. So central banks have to play catch up. They've got to allow development in spaces they haven't allowed before.
But in the African countries, they understand, the central banks understand that you need to little bit give a leeway in terms of how do you actually onboard customers. So is there a different way to bring in a credit risk profiling so that access to funds becomes easier?
The KYC, or Know Your Customer imperative, is important, and it looks like they're tackling it in different ways in different parts of the continent. Bottom line is that technology is providing the means for people to get ahead. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start with Barrick Gold. It says it's reached a deal to settle a long-running tax dispute between Tanzania, the government of Tanzania, and the mining group Acacia. The tax deal includes a payment of $300 million to settle outstanding taxes and other disputes, lifting of an export ban on mineral concentrates, and the sharing of future economic benefits from 3 mines on a 50-50 basis. We'll bring you a more detailed report on this a little later in the show. Elsewhere, Royal Dutch Shell plans to sell its onshore upstream assets in Egypt's Western Desert. The oil company wants to focus on expanding its Egyptian offshore gas exploration process instead. It also says it wants to start operating the new areas that essentially found in the Mediterranean Sea in the second half of next year. The Nigerian Telecommunications Minister has ordered the Nigerian Communications Commission to compel telcos in the country to reduce the price of their data packages. Now, the move comes in the wake of high data subscription prices placed on subscribers by service providers. In addition to this directive, the minister has also asked the regulator to put an end to the frequent data depletion that's experienced by many a subscriber. And finally, in aviation, Indonesia plans to share a final report into the deadly Boeing 737 MAX crash with the families of the victims. The crash involved a Lion Air 737 MAX jet. It took place shortly after takeoff in October last year. The plane killed all 189 people on board and it plunged into the Java Sea. The families of the victims of the first crash will be briefed before the report is then made public. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 18 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Zimbabwe is printing new banknotes to ease a cash shortage in the country. And we'll look at how the Russian president would like his country to have a bit more influence in Africa when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This
Well,
is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. On to Zimbabwe now. The state's cash-strapped government over there started printing new banknotes to meet required cash demands. According to this country's central bank, the new notes are going to be introduced into the market in a matter of months. This comes even as the government is looking to ease the country's cash crisis, which has seen the current few notes in circulation being traded at a premium on the parallel market. At the moment, Zimbabwe is experiencing its worst economic crisis in a decade. Inflation is at more than 300%. By some estimates. Economists, however, do warn that printing of cash could further fuel the high levels of inflation we're seeing in the South African economy, which is now the second highest in the world after Venezuela. As mentioned a little earlier in the hour, Tanzania and Barrick Gold have reached a deal to settle a long-running tax dispute between the government of Tanzania and the mining group Acacia. Now, under the terms of this deal, a new joint operating company called Twiga Minerals will be formed, along with a whole bunch of other operational agreements. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with a summary.
Under the agreement, the Tanzanian government will buy a 16% shareholding in each of the mines and 84% for Barrick Gold Corporation. It also includes the payment of $300 million to settle an outstanding tax dispute, as well as lifting a ban on which saw the company initially denied to export mining byproducts like sand, which was exported and processed elsewhere. The deal is also agreed on sharing of future economic benefits from the mines on a 50-50 basis. The new operating company called Twiga Minerals will be based in country.
The new Barrick will manage the Buzwagi, Bulyanhulu, and North Mara mines from here in Tanzania through a Tanzanian company that has been registered in Tanzania, with its headquarters in Tanzania.
Professor Kabudi insisted the new deal marked a new partnership with Barrick under the new Twiga Minerals name, while the CEO of Barrick Gold International said the new company Twiga Minerals will make their new partnership an example for other mining ventures who are thinking about investing in Tanzania.
Today represents a milestone in a voyage, a partnership voyage that started out back in 2017.
An Africa-focused international dispute resolution framework will also be established as part of the agreement. Details of the deal have been submitted to Tanzania's Attorney General for review and is expected to be done by November 15th. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has stepped up his push for influence in African states days before he hosts a summit with African leaders. Putin says that Moscow can offer help without political conditions, strings attached in effect, unlike what he described as the exploitative West. Now, the Kremlin says it expects 47 African heads of state to converge in Sochi for the event, which takes place between the 23rd and the 24th of October. Moscow is hosting its first Russia-Africa summit as part of an ambitious push for influence and business across Africa. Putin gave his clearest idea yet of his pitch to African countries. He warned of rising competition over Africa and its resources, and is accusing the West of trying to intimidate African countries to exploit their natural resources. He didn't name any names, but he just said he was referring to countries that used to be colonial powers on the continent. Now, Ethiopia might soon allow non-financial institutions to operate mobile money services under a new law that's been drafted by the National Bank of Ethiopia. Currently, electronic payments and money transfer services are reserved only for banks and microfinancial institutions. Now, Ethiopia's central bank says its target is to reach the over 70% of the country that is still unbanked. CGTN's Cote Njohi filed this report from Addis Ababa.
United Bank, one of Ethiopia's commercial banks, has been operating a mobile money service for the past 11 years. It used to be called SMS banking.
Using the SMS code, people were able to do fund transfer, balance inquiry, and so on. But the last 5 or 6 years, we migrate to mobile app and USSD-based applications. And currently we have quite a large number of customers who are using mobile banking systems.
In the last 5 years, the bank says the system has evolved to allow people to purchase airline tickets and reload phone airtime. But now the government wants these services and more to be offered by non-financial institutions. Under the proposals, the National Bank of Ethiopia will require interested companies to have a minimum capital of over $1.5 million. Financial technology expert Polycarp Osero says it will lead Ethiopia towards a digital economy.
It will enable the businesses to thrive in terms of availability of funding, in terms of ease of doing business. At the same time, it will also help in financial inclusion and financial access, because there are some people, like in some countries, who don't even have bank accounts. They only have the mobile wallets.
In neighboring Kenya, mobile money services are led by telecommunication companies. Ethiopia's Ethio Telecom, the country's only telecommunication company, has expressed interest in engaging in mobile money services too. It hopes to tap into its over 40 million subscribers. But Ethiopia's central bank's draft law opens up the service to even non-telecom companies. Registered business companies wholly owned by Ethiopians and non-nationals with Ethiopian origin will be allowed to apply for licenses from the central bank to offer the service. Commercial banks say they will still remain relevant.
I do believe that, in fact, it increases the bankable customers because at the end of the day, the wallet accounts, the maximum that you can do is for low transactions, holding amount is very minimal, and the like. So at the end of the day, customers will tend to move their funds to the bank accounts where they can bear interest on that too.
The government says it will take time to convince some consumers to move to a cashless system, but it hopes to be serving up a digital economy to as many customers as possible soon. Colette Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Cairo has inaugurated an underground station this weekend. It's the largest underground metro station in the Middle East and Africa. The station is in addition to the underground expansion plan that aims to connect Cairo's downtown area to the airport by 2020, as well as the new capital. CGTN's Adel El Marouki reports.
The complexity of its multi-story underground structure has forced the metro trains to bypass it until it is completed. 28 meters underground the populous Heliopolis district, the country is celebrating the opening of its newest and biggest metro station. Egypt is more proud that it was built by domestic expertise.
Generally, metro lines are built through a French-Egyptian joint venture, except for all the next phases, which will only be led by Egyptian Arab contractors. This station is one of them. It's a big metro stop. It's 3 levels underground, and it's about 10,000 meters square in area.
The Heliopolis metro station is part of the newest 45-kilometer-long Line 3 project, which will connect downtown Cairo to the airport by 2020. Later, it will lead to the planned Chinese light rail train that will reach the new capital. Heliopolis Station has also created space for a 5,000 square meters underground shopping mall, the first in Egypt.
This mall is a great addition to the Metroline users and to the residents of Heliopolis. It will serve the great masses who come here every day. To ensure it will be managed properly, we are holding a tender for Egyptian investors. The mall will be an additional revenue source to the Underground Authority and it will help in decreasing its deficit gap.
Egypt's metro operation costs the nation nearly $1 million daily. The government only collects half of that from ticketing. 2.5 million Egyptians use the metro every day. This station has given them access to a vital city center area.
It's great to have this station finally operating. I usually park my car and go to work with the metro to save all the time I waste in the street crowds. With this station, I'll get to work after only 30 minutes.
The new massive station is under the landscape of Heliopolis city center. It has costed $117 million. And by the time Line 3 is completed, more than 3 million Egyptians will be benefiting from the expansion projects of the metro line. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
It's 18:30 GMT. You're watching Global Business. Here's what's coming up next. The UK Speaker rules against the government trying to get another vote on the Brexit deal on Monday. We'll explain why. And Lebanon's new economic reforms have failed to end protests in the capital, Beirut.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's recap some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. 90 Libyan legislators have been meeting in the Egyptian capital. They're working on a political solution for this divided North African state in an attempt to form a unity government, a single unity government. They've also announced that a comprehensive parliament meeting will be held in Libya soon in coordination with the UN to agree on a roadmap for such a government. Elsewhere, the government of Sudan has agreed to open humanitarian access to war-torn parts of the country as part of a new roadmap for the resumption of peace talks with rebel groups. Sudan's deputy head of the Transitional Military Council, General Mohammed Hamdan, and the chair of the Sudanese Revolutionary Front have already signed a ceasefire agreement. And finally, in Zimbabwe, the cash-strapped government started printing new banknotes to meet required cash demands. According to the country's central bank, the new notes will be hitting the market in a matter of months. This comes even as the government is trying to ease the country's crippling cash shortage, which has seen the few notes in circulation being traded at a premium on the parallel market. That's a run through your headlines. All right then, on to Brexit. You're going to be hearing a lot about this all the way to the end of October. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's plans for Brexit got another blow on Monday. The UK Parliament has essentially denied him a vote on his withdrawal agreement to the EU just days after a similar vote was essentially sabotaged by opposition and rebel parliamentarians. John Bercow, Speaker of the House of Commons, says it would be repetitive and disorderly to allow a new vote on essentially the exact same thing. In an unexpected twist to Brexit's months-long stalemate, legislators forced the Prime Minister to ask the EU for an extension to his October 31st deadline. Now, as part of that request, a vote on Johnson's EU exit agreement did not take place. Lawmakers say they want more time to scrutinise the relevant legislation and make sure there's sufficient time to implement it so that a so-called no-deal Brexit, essentially the UK crashing out of the EU, can be completely ruled out. All right, then, there's a fair bit to get through. Let's join Richard Bestick, who's live in London, who's been following the latest developments from that end of the world. So, Richard, the Speaker ruling against the government trying to reintroduce, or essentially get a yes-no vote today on the Brexit deal. Why?
Well, you'll remember, as you were saying there, Ramah, over the weekend, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson summoned Parliament for its first Saturday sitting in nearly 4 decades. And the idea was to push through Parliament at the highest speed possible what he considered to be his new Brexit deal triumph that he'd secured in Brussels. Now, as with everything Brexit, nothing goes according to plan. And the members of Parliament completely commandeered the agenda and, as you were saying there, passed a vote by a substantial 16 majority, which allowed them to scrutinise the detailed legislation for the Brexit deal, what will be around about 100 pages long, before they finally give their option. Now, in the past, that would have been a problem, but because of that letter you were talking about, Boris Johnson can't crash out without a deal, so he had to come back today and ask the Speaker, can I have another go at getting my bill through? Because on Saturday, when the MPs secured that vote, he left the building and went home and didn't bother pushing through the vote. So he came back today, said, can I have another go at it? And Speaker John Bercow, not the favourite individual for the Prime Minister, said, no, you definitely can't.
So what happens now? Because it sounds like legislators want time to scrutinise these legislation line by line. What options are available for the Prime Minister?
His options seem to be shutting down all around him. I mean, that letter shuts down the option of getting out without a deal by Halloween. He's now in a position where he can't resubmit his straight up and down approval of his Brexit deal agreed with Brussels, and has to have his deal examined line by line, combed through by members of Parliament over the next weeks to come. Now, the danger therein lies that members of Parliament will now have the opportunity of amending the legislation. In other words, changing the deal. And that could be anything from making it a softer Brexit to, get this, another referendum on Brexit, which the government might not necessarily win. So the options for Johnson are closing down and the elephant traps are opening up.
So the Prime Minister has repeatedly said he would obey the law, essentially complying with the Ben Act, which you could say he sort of did over the weekend. But he sends a letter arguing against the extension to the EU at the exact same time. So how does that square with the letter and the spirit of the law? And more importantly, if you're in the EU or UK citizen, which of those letters do you believe?
Well, the courts in Scotland are examining whether sending that second letter, which said disregard the first letter from Parliament, this is what I really think. I don't want an extension on October the 31st. The courts in Scotland are examining that issue, asking exactly the question you're asking. So at the moment, they've today announced that they're deferring their decision. So we don't know yet whether he, in the eyes of the courts, will have broken the law, but perhaps he's gone against the spirit of it. And certainly the opposition parties in Parliament are saying he's been churlish and childish. Now, coming out of coming out of Brussels, it has been made clear that even though he refused to sign the letter that Parliament ordered him to send, they accept that as a request, and Brussels is going ahead. But they haven't decided yet, and what's more, Brussels hasn't said when it will decide to give an extension, and even then we don't know how long that extension might be for. The only thing we do know is that Brussels is watching in wonderment, presumably, what's happening in London before it makes a decision on ratifying that deal with Boris Johnson. So they will wait, and that will probably come after October the 31st. So whatever happens, Ramah, the idea of a Halloween Brexit is looking scarily uncertain.
Indeed, we'll see how this plays out. One last question for you. So the French President, Emmanuel Macron, he's on record saying that the UK should not get an extension even if they ask for one, which obviously has already happened. But given the delays and the chaos of the last few years and the acrimony across the English Channel, do other EU leaders agree with him? Do they just want this entire episode to be over and done with?
I think they do. I think the mood music coming out of Brussels is that the other 27 members of the European Union are entirely fed up with the whole Brexit process and the toing and froing by the British government and the British Parliament. They do want it sorted. What they don't want, though, is getting the blame for Britain crashing out. And so they will allow extra time. But it's a tiresome business for Brussels, as indeed it is for the British public here in Britain.
Dear, let's see how all this does play out. Richard Bestick live in London. Thank you very much. Now, Lebanon's cabinet has approved a reform package that includes halving ministers' salaries, among other elements of reform, in a bid to ease an economic crisis, but at the same time diffuse the biggest protests against the ruling elite in decades. However, protesters aren't buying it. They're not convinced by the latest efforts to diffuse this economic crisis. Up and down the country, people have blocked the roads for a fifth straight day as hundreds of thousands of people have flooded the streets. They blame the country's politicians for pushing the economy to the point of collapse. The Lebanese government recently approved a 2020 budget with no new taxes and an estimated deficit of 0.6% compared to the targeted level of around 7% for 2019.
We are not leaving the streets. We don't believe not even a quarter of a word of what he said.
They have been ruling for a long time. If they wanted to do something, they would have done it.
Further afield, dozens of global CEOs are in Shanghai for the 31st annual meeting of the International Business Leaders Advisory Council. The focus this year is on enhancing the capacity and the competitiveness of that city. Heads of global enterprises are offering their suggestions on exactly how that can be done. CGTN's Wule has more.
This is Shanghai, one of the most dynamic and international megacities in China. After decades of rapid expansion, it is home to thousands of global companies and institutions. Since 1989, global CEOs gather in Shanghai each year to offer their expertise to the Shanghai mayor.
Shanghai are one around how do you as a city bring the right talent with the right incentives, how do you manage the cost. The city of Shanghai has a high cost base.
To make Shanghai a zero carbon city, and we think that it would be indeed a great achievement for the city to build such a roadmap.
As a first-comer, Johnson Controls chairman George Oliver felt excited about offering his suggestions on developing Shanghai into a smarter city.
But now utilizing data, using new platforms and data to really enhance the experience, whether it be how you live, work, learn, play. I think it's an opportunity to take just an incredible city and be able to reinvent itself, utilizing technology and data.
Whereas the early consoles were dominated by business leaders from manufacturing industries, today's panels have been expanded to span finance, pharmaceuticals, technology, and other sectors.
To address some very specific issues that are not so much great policies and so on, but how to improve processes to make life easier for business.
In the beginning, the council had only 12 members from 7 countries. Today, it has grown into a true international think tank.
The 32nd eBlack meeting is scheduled to be held on October 25th next year, and the theme will be Shanghai to its greater opening up and high-quality development.
From the business environment to innovative technology and connectivity, these global heads have offered various suggestions on how to improve the city as a whole. Many say Shanghai's experience of pulling together global excellence and wisdom can be references for other cities to follow. Wu Lei, CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, the world is changing and changing pretty fast. Products that are mass-produced today weren't even invented a few years ago. Think about, say, a decade ago. Where would you actually be able to buy a fully electric car if it wasn't a Tesla or Porsche Taycan, for instance? But at the same time, it's very hard to predict what lies ahead. Here's CGTN's Daniel Bay with a glimpse of what tomorrow's factories might look like.
Shiny robot arms performing the most precise calculations. The 2019 World Intelligent Manufacturing Conference is showing us what the factories of the future might look like. Over 300 entrepreneurs from 12 countries brought their latest products to the Chinese city of Nanjing, including more cutting-edge tech like artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and machine learning.
If you turn the steering wheel, the car will respond in less than 10 milliseconds. That's how responsive it is. And 4G networks can't support this level of speed. Only 5G can. Driverless cars are used mostly for places dangerous for humans, like when there is a fire or an emergency. They can run on set courses. We can also take over the vehicles remotely.
This is the 4th time Nanjing is hosting the conference, and this year's exhibition has attracted more foreign companies than previous years. This year's event also includes the first summit specifically for BRICS countries to share their latest industrial developments. There will also be seminars on groundbreaking areas like 5G technology, the industrial Internet of Things, and more. Experts believe they could be a game changer like no other.
The early promoters of intelligent manufacturing were solution providers and IT companies, and the cost of adopting new technologies was high. Now with new technologies, companies can boost production while reducing labor costs and defective rates in the meantime.
However, not everyone is super positive. There are already worries of potential bubbles in the market forming. Such is the sheer power of these intelligent technologies.
And then actually, the more productive they become, the more efficient they are. They're pumping out more and more of the same thing that's not necessarily the demand in the market. This is a real challenge in the market. That would bring a very significant overcapacity moving down the road.
So, he says, it becomes essential for solution providers to better understand the industry they are serving. The trend is clear at the end of the day. Manufacturing is getting smarter and the world will see more robots moving into the factories of tomorrow. Daniel Bay, CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through commodities here for you. So Brent crude futures have been behaving rather interestingly. They're continuing their decline in today's trading session, down about 1.33% at 16:35 GMT, in part due to demand side concerns. Second half of the year has been especially rough for this particular contract. The contract, in fact, is down by over 8% from the 1st of July. Here's what's coming up next. We're diving into the world of e-commerce with an app that brings groceries to your doorstep in Ghana. And the authorities in Cote d'Ivoire are trying to promote waste management through recycling. All that and more is coming up next.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Online grocery shopping is taking off in Ghana. One entrepreneur set up a company 3 years ago to provide a grocery delivery service to people who are simply not able to find the time to actually go to the market. Analysts say this is a sector that's set to grow rather rapidly in the West African economy. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai with that story on Grassroots tonight.
Elsie Ewuzi Samson is in Accra's biggest groceries market, Agbogbloshie. 5 years ago, she hatched an idea to set up a grocery delivery business targeting busy career women and men who are unable to go to the market to shop themselves. In 2016, she founded her company, Big Sam's Market.
I wasn't a market person when I started. I would hardly come to the market. So I even put myself in the shoes of my clients. And then I was a bit nervous when I started, but then they explained things to me, they gave me the right groceries, and they've been very good, they've been very loyal.
With her business, she's also helping traders like Abigail Asantua.
Sometimes tomatoes there.
Our tomatoes used to go bad because it was difficult to get customers. We're now able to sell our tomatoes before they go bad because Elsie buys in large quantities.
Away from the market, Elsie cleans all the groceries and food and then packages them. This is the package that goes to Elsie's customers. Well cleaned and neatly wrapped. She says she has so far served over 400 people with this grocery service. Elsie's company, Big Sam's Market, employs 4 people. She uses social media to connect with her customers. Retail and marketing analysts say although online grocery shopping is not yet popular among Ghanaians, it could be a big deal in the future.
A lot of people are getting connected to the internet these days, and the middle class is growing every year. And so I see a big potential for online grocery shopping because for a lot of these middle class working women, students, it's going to take away the stress from their lives, and they are going to find it very convenient.
Elsie says as a startup, a major challenge she is facing is her inability to raise funds to inject into her business because securing a loan from the bank is difficult.
We wish we had a truck and all that, but then I believe that as the business grows, such opportunities will come, and then we'll be able to raise all those things.
So, while online grocery shopping hasn't yet hit the mainstream in Ghana, Elsie hopes she'll be the one who delivers it. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
One last story for you. The first edition of the Recycling Fair has been held in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, the largest commercial city in the cocoa producer. Now, the event seeks to promote eco-citizen actions by encouraging people to recycle all kinds of waste. Here's more from CGTN's Jane Cairo.
These are some of the products made from recycled materials. And the Abidjan Recycling Fair sought to celebrate the initiative and creativity of those behind these items, as it also pushes for management of all kinds of waste through recycling.
Waste is the third source of greenhouse gas emissions in Cote d'Ivoire. It is also a public health concern. In order to meet the internationally required standards of reducing gas emissions by 28%, the waste management sector occupies a very important position in this nation.
This here is a pair of recycled shoes. We picked them up in the trash. As you see, they are already worn and faded. We recycle them, cover them and give them a new and better look. This way, someone else can wear them again.
I work with these objects that I recycle. I go to the trash in the streets to collect things that seem useless to many, such as bags, boxes, and so on. I am a stylist, so I work on these objects and give them added value. It is rare to see this kind of show in Africa, so I came to participate in this show to create a network and display my creations.
In Cote d'Ivoire, the major stakeholders in recycling are mostly from the informal sector. But according to experts, this sector can generate up to $3.7 billion annually and create thousands of jobs if well harnessed.
As I often say, recycling is a goldmine. You see what craftsmen and companies that value waste management can create just by recycling waste. I remain convinced that recycling can effectively solve the problem of youth unemployment in our countries.
Over 1,000 exhibitors participated in the event, which lasted for 3 days. Apart from the display of items, participants and those in attendance were treated to a fashion show which showcased the beauty of recycling and importance of a clean and healthy environment. Jane Keo, CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through currencies for you. So one debt issuance of note for you this week. Kenya's looking to raise about $600 million or so from the markets to fund infrastructure spending for the 2019-2020 budget. The state is not offering a fixed coupon rate on this particular one. You bidders will have to determine what price you're willing to pay at auction. The rand still hovering around 14.70s in today's session. Since July, it's eased by about 4% to the dollar. Lots of factors around that, from Eskom's shaky finances to sentiments around the US-China trade war. Essentially, take your pick. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the programme and the stuff we've seen here for the last hour or so. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your time in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.